Milford, Kansas, 1918. A farmer tells the doctor he feels like a flat tire. The doctor looks out at the goat pen and makes a joke. 9 months later, the farmer names his son Billy. There is a piece of plastic on my desk with 3 claims printed on it. First, a man who had 1 claim printed on his wall and nobody ever checked it. He bought his medical degree in 1915. It was good enough for 8 states. 20 years later, Kansas took his license. The federal government took his radio station. Same year, both of them, and that autumn 180,000 people wrote his name on a ballot for governor. He did not fall. He got louder. Stay with me, because the only thing that ever stopped him was a lawsuit he filed himself. Milford, Kansas, 1918. One doctor in the whole town. A farmer named Bill Stitsworth comes in and says he is worn out. No strength, no interest, nothing left for his wife. There is no treatment for that in 1918. So the doctor looks out of the window at the goat pen and makes a joke. You'd not have that trouble if you had a pair of those goat glands. Stitsworth does not laugh. He asks the doctor to do it. A few days later, the doctor opens him up and sews goat tissue inside him. 9 months later, the Stitsworths have a son. They name him Billy. Within a year, men are getting off around at Milford on purpose. The doctor's name is John Gromulus Brinkley. He's not a surgeon. He studied at Bennett Medical College in Chicago and left without a degree. What he has instead is a diploma from the Eclectic Medical University in Kansas City, dated the 7th of May, 1915. He did not earn that paper, he bought it. And this is the part that should stop you. That paper was legally good enough to practice medicine in 8 American states. 8! This was not a forgery hidden in a drawer. It was a real license, issued on the strength of a diploma he had paid for. Everything that happens next comes out of that one piece of paper. Word travels fast. Brinkley starts at $150 an operation. Then he raises it. $750 cash in advance. In today's money, that is about $12,000 a man. If you wanted human glands instead, taken from executed prisoners, the price was $5,000. Now think about who can put $750 on the table in 1922. Not farmhands. This became a rich man's operation, and rich men traveled to a village in Kansas to have it done. He was cutting into them with a diploma that had cost him money, not years. In 1922, he published a book about himself. A publicist named Sidney Flower wrote it. The title tells you everything. The goat gland transplantation has originated and successfully performed in over 600 operations upon men and women. 600. That is his own count, printed in his own advertising, and it is the only figure in this story that came from him. Then he found something that worked better than surgery. 1923. Brinkley builds a radio station in Milford and calls it KFKB. Kansas First, Kansas Best. Broadcast radio in America is 3 years old. Think about what that means in a Kansas farmhouse. Most of his listeners have never heard a stranger's voice come out of a box in their own kitchen. And one of the first voices they ever hear is his. He talks about health. He talks about the glands. He talks about himself for hours into houses with nothing else in them. By 1930, a national magazine poll named KFKB the most popular station in America. So, a man with a bold diploma now owns the loudest thing in Kansas. The program is called the Medical Question Box. Listeners write in with their symptoms. Brinkley reads the letters on air and diagnoses the writer, live, having never seen them. Then he prescribes. And watch what he actually says, because this is the machine. He does not name a medicine. He names a number. Dr. Brinkley's prescription, number 101. Only pharmacies in his own network stocked those numbers, and every one of those pharmacies sent him $1 for every bottle it sold. Quackwatch describes what was in one of them. Water, tinted with indigo. He was diagnosing strangers by post and getting paid twice for it. Not everybody got up from the table. When a patient died after one of these operations, somebody had to sign the death certificate. In Milford, that somebody was the man who had performed the surgery, By 1930, Brinkley had signed 42 of them. All 42 were his own patients. Between 1930 and 1941, more than a dozen families took him to court over a death. Say that number out loud once more, slowly. 42 death certificates, signed by the same hand that took the money. Meanwhile, in Chicago, somebody is reading everything he prints. Morris Fishbein edits the Journal of the American Medical Association, and he has made a career out of going after men who sell cures. He starts writing about Brinkley by name. Not carefully, not in the passive voice. He uses one word over and over in print for years. Quack. Hold on to that word, because it is the whole ending. 9 years from now, 12 people in Texas will be asked whether it is accurate. 1930. 2 doors shut on him in the same year. First, the Kansas Medical Board revokes his license, and the finding is not written in careful language. He has performed, in their words, an organized charlatanism, quite beyond the invention of the humble mountebank. Then, in May, the Federal Radio Commission sits for 3 days and refuses to renew KFKB. Their reason is the mechanism, not the man. Prescribing for a patient the doctor has never seen is not in the public interest. A court in Washington upheld that on the 2nd of February 1931. License gone. Station gone. He is 45 years old and he has nothing left to sell. And here is where the story stops behaving. He runs for governor. He announced too late to be printed on the ballot, so every vote for him had to be a write-in. That means a voter, alone in a booth, with a pencil, spelling his name by hand correctly. In November 1930, more than 180,000 consoms did exactly that. 29.5% of the state. He came third, and Harry Woodring became governor. Read that again because I had to. A man stripped of his medical license 8 months earlier, banned from the airwaves, took almost a third of Kansas with a pencil. He does not sit and wait for an appeal. He drives south to Del Rio, Texas, on the Rio Grande. Then he crosses a bridge into Mexico, where American radio law does not reach, and builds again. In October 1931, his new station goes on the air at 840 kilohertz, 50,000 watts, then 150,000, then a million. American stations were capped at 50,000. He was 20 times louder than anything legal on the American side, and the American side could hear every word. He ran for governor again in 1932 from Texas and got 244,607 votes, 30.5%. He lost to Alf Landon, who would go on to run for president. Then Congress passed the Communications Act of 1934, and the loophole started to close. His answer was almost funny. Record the programs in Texas on transcription discs. Drive the discs over the bridge. Play them in Mexico. The law said the broadcast had to come from the Mexican side, so it did. Now, the obvious question. Did any of it work? Suppose for a second that it did, because plenty of his patients said so at the time. There is a plain explanation for that, and it needs no goat in it at all. Take a desperate man. Charge him a fortune. Put him under a knife. Then tell him, with total confidence, that he is fixed. A good share of those men are going to feel fixed. What cannot have happened is the thing he was actually selling. Goat tissue does not join to a human body. It is rejected. There was never a mechanism, and the only result anybody can point to in the whole story is a boy in Kansas named Billy. Then there is the election, and here the retellings go further than the record does. Suppose for a moment they are right. The most watched version of this story on YouTube has 143,000 views. It says the two parties agreed to count only the ballots that spelled his name exactly, and that if every variation had been counted, he would have won easily. The first half stands up. Write-in rules were strict, and that is documented. The second half is arithmetic that nobody has ever published. And you do not need it, because the number that can be checked is already ridiculous. A man with no medical license took almost a third of a state. The third thing people believe is that the medical establishment destroyed him for being an outsider. Half of that is flatly true. There was a campaign, it was organized, and it had one name at the top of it. Morris Fishbein ran it personally, in print for years. A Kansas television documentary puts it in a single sentence. The fight against him was led by Dr. Morris Fishbein. So if you want a villain in a good suit, there he is. But every version that stops there leaves out the next line. Fishbein never took Brinkley to court. Brinkley took Fishbein to court. And the last one, both big retellings end on the same constellation. Whatever else he did, Brinkley gave America country music. Direct quote. 143,000 views. John Brinkley in many ways is the father of country music. The other one calls his station the first country music ever broadcast on radio. Here are the dates. The first known barn dance broadcast in America came out of Wapping, Fort Worth. 4th of January 1923. The fiddler was a man called Bonner. The WSM barn dance, which became the Grand Ole Opry, started on the 28th of November 1925. Brinkley's Mexican station first went on the air in October 1931. The Carter family arrived in Del Rio in 1938 for $75 a week. Country music was on American radio 15 years before he was. The 22nd of March 1939, Del Rio, Texas. Judge Robert J. McMillan on the bench and John Brinkley in the plaintiff's chair. He is suing Morris Fishbein for libel, and he wants $250,000. Nobody dragged him there, he filed it. He had been called the quack in print for a decade. He had finally decided to make somebody prove it in front of a jury. Quackwatch prints one line of his about the man across the aisle, without a transcript behind it. As Dr. Fishbein goes to heaven, he wants to go the other way. In filing, you change the question completely. A libel trial does not ask whether goat glands work. It asks whether the words printed about you were true. So Fishbein's lawyers never had to defend medicine. They had to establish one thing only. That quack was a fair description of this particular man, which meant Brinkley's whole life walked into the room as evidence. The bought diploma, the prescription sold by number, the dollar back from every pharmacy, the 42 certificates in his own handwriting. He put all of it on the table himself, and he did it voluntarily. The jury found for Fishbein, and they did not simply dismiss the claim. They answered the question out loud. Brinkley, they held, should be considered a charlatan and a quack in the ordinary, well-understood meaning of those words. 12 people were asked whether one word was accurate. They said it was. After that, it came apart quickly. The lawsuits followed the verdict, more than $3 million of them. The tax authorities opened an investigation. By 1941, he was bankrupt. The post office charged him with mail fraud. That case never reached a courtroom. On the 26th of May, 1942, in San Antonio, he died, 56 years old. 3 heart attacks, 1 leg amputated, heart failure. So, look at what is on my desk. 1 ounce of silver, sealed in plastic and covered in claims. On the label, printed by a grading company, RP69. That is somebody's opinion of how well it was struck out of 70. On the coin itself, $5. That is a face value nobody in Tokelau has ever spent, because the atolls use New Zealand money, and above it, Tokelau. This coin was not made in Tokelau. 1,500 people live there, and there is no mint on the islands. 3 statements, every one of them certified by somebody. The animal on the reverse is a goat with her kid, which is why it is on the table today. Now hold the next to diploma from the Eclectic Medical University. Same object. A printed claim, issued by an institution, legally sufficient and worth exactly as much as the checking behind it. There is one difference, and it is the whole video. Somebody checked this one. Somebody photographed it, measured it, sealed it, and put their own name on the answer. Bill Stitsworth never asked to see a certificate. He looked at the wall, saw a frame, and got on the table. Here is what I take from this. Nobody in this story was stupid. The farmer was not stupid. 180,000 voters were not stupid. They all did what everybody does. They looked at the paper and stopped there. The paper says doctor, so he is a doctor. The label says 69, so it is a 69. I made a whole video about letting ChatGPT grade coins, and it is the same machine at a smaller scale. Something with authority in its voice hands you a confident answer. The answer is wrong, and nothing about it looks wrong. Subscribe if you want more of these. And tell me in the comments, what is the last piece of paper you took at face value?